Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Small Business Show. My name is Swire Ho, your host for the show. My guest today is Mickie Kennedy from eReleases. Mickie founded eReleases 24 years ago to help small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility and credibility through press release marketing. He lives in Baltimore area. How you doing, Mickie?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Before we dive in, I'd love to find out more about your journey and if you can share with the listener, how did you get into the PR space and what have you been enjoying your work so far?
Right. I graduated with an MFA in creative writing about 26 years ago. And I just assumed I would wait tables and write poetry in the evenings. And after a summer of working on my feet, on concrete, serving, I realized that wasn't for me. So I was looking for a safe office job. And I ended up getting hired at a telecom research startup. And I was employee number 3. And because I had a writing background, they really wanted me to figure out how to write press releases and send them to the media. And what I discovered was I had a really good knack for trying to determine the story behind some of the telecom numbers. There's a lot of data there, and sometimes you can flesh out a really interesting story. And I was able to communicate that to the media. And we were faxing at the time, and I started to get a lot of journalists asking if I could email them. And that's what gave me the idea for eReleases, emailing press releases to journalists. And I started reaching out to journalists and launched a little over 24 years ago eReleases with 10,000 journalists in my database. And today the database that we use is considerably larger, but it's still the same business model. We've coupled it with also offering a newswire distribution over Cision's PR Newswire. And that way we sort of are maximizing the distribution to as many journalists as possible.
Thank you for sharing. I have a lot of follow-up questions for you, especially as a small business standpoint. How would you define a press release? And, for my limited understanding, do we need to a big company in order to issue a press release? Or what do you think, who needs a press release?
Right. So I do believe that most people can develop a press release themselves with a little bit of help and strategy. It is certainly not rocket science, and most press releases are written in the third person. They're written very simplistically, so there's not like a lot of flowery language, or you have to be a really great wordsmith. You just need to be able to communicate well. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people look at what other people are writing, the types of press releases that are out there. And so I would say 85% of the press releases that are being issued are very safe announcements to the media that aren't really newsworthy, and they really don't say anything that a journalist is going to want to build a story around. And so my job at eReleases is to help my customers and potential customers to make sure they're doing more strategic types of press releases, and press releases that matter and have a newsworthiness that allows them to get easier pickup and have their press release turned into actual articles written by a journalist.
How does that differ in the world of social media now? Why would one wanted to create a press release than just to send what you want to say, let's say on Twitter or on your social media platform? How do those two difference, or are they coexist with each other?
They do coexist. As a matter of fact, a lot of influencers exist in the media database at PR Newswire and have journalist access to the wire, because it is something that can be sculpted. If you cover fashion and you're on Instagram and you're an influencer, you can get access to the fashion feed at the Newswire. But even more importantly, you can customize that wire by using keywords to include or to exclude, so that you're really looking at a feed of headlines that are really relevant to what you're interested in. So it makes it very easy for you to see what's coming through the pipeline, what might be something that you'd want to learn more about and discover and possibly include as you are working with your audience. And influencers have the same job as journalists, in which they're trying to build content. Theirs is just more visually oriented and often incorporates video. But there's no reason why you can't have the best of both worlds, where you're reaching traditional media, where certainly some of your colleagues and people within your industry are existing in trade publications, but also consumers directly as well through newspapers, certain magazines, and radio and TV as well, and now including social media.
Can you kind of control where it goes to, or do you want to have maximum exposure for all the media outlet, all the different platforms to pick it up? So, can you talk more about that?
Right. So you do get to target your industries. For example, with eReleases, you get to pick the sort of like the type of journalist that you're looking for. So it might be high tech, it might be advertising, could be banking. So you pick your specific industries that are relevant to you, and that sort of limits who it's available to, but it is also available to everyone. So a journalist who maybe writes on banking can also go and look at the feeds in other industries or even regions and things like that. So there's lots of ways to drill it down. And so there is the potential for people to cover something outside of their beat. We had it's not unusual for a client to create a product and feel that it only speaks to one audience. And when they do a pivot and build a press release that speaks to a different audience, they find that they get a lot of media pickup. We had one that was many years ago. It was just an umbrella that you could attach to things, and they had designed it to be for golfers and to attach to your golf bag and keep your clubs dry. But they found that they were getting inquiries from people in the disability market who were interested in attaching it to a wheelchair. And could it be attached to a wheelchair? And they discovered that it could be. It could really be attached to anything and adjustable. And so they did a pivot in which they did a press release specifically to the audience, and they ended up selling out their current inventory in just a few weeks because of the pickup that they get. So it is interesting, but the one thing that I always tell people to try to do is try to narrow your messaging to speak to the perfect audience. And you'll do a better job speaking to your perfect audience than trying to speak to everybody. There's something inherent in all of us that we feel like, if I can just come up with a very general announcement that's applicable to everyone, then potentially everyone could pick it up. And what generally happens is just the opposite. Almost no one picks it up because you really weren't speaking to any one core audience.
Yeah, I really like your point there, because in marketing, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to nobody. So
Right.
don't be afraid to go niche to speak to a particular audience, because if you are able to connect with a special audience, so they all listen to you when you talk, that's really powerful. Imagine you can own a group or own a certain demographics. Every time that you put out releases, or if you put out content, they listen to it. That's already really powerful. And you have to figure out, as a business professional, not everyone can be your client, and you don't want everyone to be your client. So why don't just pay attention to what your clients are care about, and those are the news that you could kind of limit and produce for your audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked about this a little bit, but I think it is one of the most important key point, in my opinion, is to find something newsworthy. If you tell me what interesting about my company, I could tell you everything about our company, but they're not necessarily newsworthy for other, or in a third person point of view. So how would you guide us, with so many news and so many things that we have, to find something that's newsworthy that will actually get picked up and people will respond to?
Right. I tell people to sort of reverse engineer your message. I get so many product launch press releases that are really just a lot of bullets of features on the product. And there's not a lot there for a journalist to build a story. And journalists are story builders. And so knowing the story arc, and if you don't know a good story arc, do a little research. The hero journey. There's lots of different story board ideas that are out there about how to build a story, but make sure you have the elements of a story. I often push back to clients who are doing a product launch and wanting me to review it. And I say, this is a good list of features, but there's no story here. I assume you had people beta test it. Oh yeah, we had this one client that achieved 17% more sales because of the way they implemented this. And I said, you need to put them in the press release. That's a use case study of one person using the product, the results that they achieved, and you can also get a quote from them. And so all of a sudden there's a story. So there's a new product out, but this is what the product did for this client. This is what the product did for another client. So it sort of gives the ability for a journalist to build a story. So I always tell people to sort of reverse engineer, pretend you're the journalist. You're literally just a gatekeeper trying to decide what content is worth sharing with your audience. How could you make your announcement or what you want to announce more appealing, more irresistible, more something that would be shareable? And I think if you approach it from that, rather than your perspective of you wanting to get a lot of sales, I think that you can stand a really good chance of sort of building elements within your press release that make it more shareable and more story worthy. And one of the things that a lot of small businesses try to do is appear bigger than they are, appear more corporate. Don't let people know that it's just, a small startup of a couple of people or someone working from their home. And surprisingly, some of the obstacles that you overcome and embarrassing things that have happened in your history are often the things that make you endearing and interesting to the media. I had one client who had a very embarrassing Thanksgiving where they canceled their Thanksgiving dinner and had to fulfill packages in their garage to get out that Monday after Thanksgiving. And I pushed them to include that in the press release and talk about that experience about early in their their company life. And it got picked up in Inc. magazine. And they built the article around that story. And it's something that appeals to the entrepreneurial journey, something that we all sort of experience, setbacks, obstacles, problems. And it makes you very, in one standpoint, vulnerable, but also authentic. And owning your story and being authentic is something that works really well. And I think that so many people suffer from an imposter syndrome where they want to appear perfect and larger than they are. And so I tell people to use your trust and authority and build on your personal stories. Other things that work really well for people is to research your industry for blind spots. Sometimes there's gaps of things that aren't being reported in your industry, but you'll find that if you go to trade shows and conferences or a great networker on LinkedIn, there are topics that come up that it seems like your trade publications aren't really mentioning, but you sort of talk about at like the water cooler or when you bump into someone like, have you noticed that clients are really taking an extra 45 to 90 days to pay lately? And, that's something that you could sort of capitalize on and make that awareness in a press release and get that to the media. And all of a sudden they can, share that and get that messaging out there. And we've had really good results with clients that aren't very newsworthy, but they really knew their industry so well that they knew things that their industry had been ignoring. And when we brought that to the industry's attention, they reported on it and gave our client the mention in the articles. And so that's really, really useful. I often have clients who've tried a few releases and nothing really happened. And I always say, if you want a slam dunk and you want a press release that's going to work, do a survey or study within your industry. Anybody can do a survey. All you have to do is sort of build out what the questions are. You want to make them very timely, like ones that are very applicable right now. We have uncertainty in the economics situation. We have supply chain issues that are still occurring for some people. And there's also, hiring challenges. People don't want to work the way that they worked before the pandemic. A lot of people want to work from home or have a better life-work balance. And so you can put these in a survey, these types of questions. You can build out on other questions that you feel are important right now that people would want to know. And you send that out to your industry. And I always say, if you don't have an audience to send it to, there are a lot of pre-made audiences that are out there. In almost every industry, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of trade associations. I say start with the smaller and more independent ones, because they tend to do this very easily, in which you approach them and say, I'm doing this survey. I'll be doing a press release about it. And if you'll send this to your members, I'll mention you in the survey. Often they see that as a win-win. They don't get a lot of love like the large trade associations do. So they see it as a win-win, and they will often share it with their audience, sometimes through email, sometimes through social media, and occasionally through both. And you can easily get a few hundred responses that way. And it really does give you a little bit more credibility aligning yourself with a trade association. So it doesn't have to be extremely difficult to do that. And then when you get the results, you sort of look at what was the surprising results, or what was the most interesting thing, and take that and sort of build out a story in a press release as to, this is the results of this survey. This is probably a quote by you saying, this is why I believe that the survey skewed a certain way, and here are some aha moments and other things that sort of illuminate these challenges. And so that's a great way. I find that most people who sort of follow my model for doing a survey get between 8 and 14 articles written every single time. And so the least I've seen is 4, with one exception, and that was a client that asked the wrong questions. She asked, she had a great audience. She was speaking to people who read romance novels, and she was in the dating space. And the question that she asked was, do you prefer men who are more than 6 feet tall or less than 6 feet tall? And that was like the only question she asked. And that it wasn't surprising that people liked people who are over 6 feet tall. So it wasn't really, an aha moment. There wasn't anything in, she had the great audience, but she didn't ask the right questions. I prefer 16 questions, 4 on each page. I like SurveyMonkey because they make it very easy to do page by page. And you can afford to be on the last page a little playful and ask even some wild or left field questions, because at that point they've completed 75% of the survey. And if they stop at that point, you still have the data for 75%, but you can really ask some, quirky questions. Open-ended questions work really well. We had a auto repair shop in Pennsylvania that did one for the auto industry. And on the final page, one of the questions they asked was, what's the strangest thing a customer left in their car while being repaired? And it was the results from it. We were able to build this really strange list of things, and it got picked up in a lot of auto trade publications as well as newspapers, and also reached their local market as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling me the in-depth explanation of what makes newsworthy, especially like what you started with in the beginning. Instead of all the features and benefits that you as a company offer, why not pick up some case study of how real life client or customers have used your product and services who got results. So I'm sure that people wanted to know what's in it for me. People always like you said, in the shoes, care about themselves. If they see someone else using your product increase their productivity X amount of percent, right? Wow, then I pay attention. And then when a news journalist writing certain product or industry see that, they will get you as a quote. You're helping actually the reporter, because the reporter might have to scout the internet or the research department for hours. But if you are willingly feeding them information. So what if the next time they are searching for the same content, who do you think they're going to reach out to? So you might develop personal relationship like that. You want to share a quick example of what I've done for the promotional industry. So I actually noticed that, I connect with people at the promo marketing magazines, which is our trade publication on promotional product. I didn't actually pitch them for promotional product because I know they will get a lot of them. And I noticed that they have a podcast. So as a podcaster myself, I have done almost 3 years now. So I know how to do microphone, how to do the lighting. So I actually pitched to them, what are the benefits for having your own podcast in business? So I actually got through to the chief editor of the magazines. Now we got connected. I was on the podcast for an episode, and they actually invited me to write an article for them on the magazines. So I somehow using a longer approach than what you can probably do, Mickie, to get myself on the industry trade magazine. So, and then I will use those credibility, right? I will call it to tell my clients now our work has been published on industry leading magazines. So it's kind of elevating your credibility. Yes, there is some work involved, but just so as anything.
Right. It's amazing. I had one client that was a local carpet company in New Jersey that used us, and it took a while to figure out what would work. But we got picked up in a lot of carpet trade publications, floor trades publications, flooring, wood floors, tile. I didn't realize there were so many trade publications in that space, and they got probably about 30 pickups over a 1 year period. And what they did was they put together a brag book where they printed out all of these articles that they had gotten into these publications. And when they went out and gave a quote for carpet, they would show people this big binder and say, we've been picked up by Floor Trade Weekly, we've been picked up by New Jersey Magazine, we've been picked up by the local newspaper, but we've also been picked up by all of these floor trade publications. And so we're recognized nationally, and no one else that you get a quote from is going to have the experience that we do and the recognition that we do. And they started converting, I think, around 10 to 14% more conversions as a result of just incorporating that into their sales process. So there is a credibility factor that happens, almost an implied endorsement or social proof that when someone else writes about you, that you take on the role of being an expert or someone that's really respected. And people like to do business with those types of companies, people that they've seen, heard about, read an article. One of the strangest things that a client brought to me, who was like a big numbers guy, he said, our landing page works really well, and it's like 5% conversion rate, which is good in our industry. And he says, but I can't believe this. We've gotten like 300 visitors from this article that was posted, and we've gotten almost 200 sales. He goes, is it possible that this is converting at like 66%? And I said, well, not everybody who reads the article clicked. So there, but of everybody who did click, 2/3 of them were primed and wanted to do business with you. And that is something that happens with an article that doesn't happen with a landing page or marketing copy. And so it's a really great reason why media darlings find it very easy to grow their business or their brand, because the more media they get, it sort of drives the engine of more sales and more people finding out about you.
I love that example, and especially we are kind of mute and unmoved by ads. Like we see Google ads everywhere. Whenever I watch YouTube video, like as soon as I could skip the ad, I skip it. So have they spend good money. Some of them are putting together expensive ads, and what do? I skip it, or I tune it out, or I mute the audio. But if I'm ready to research on something that I might want to buy on go on a vacation, I will go to specific magazines or websites that I go to, and then if you appear on there, then you becomes the expert, right? When we want to work with someone, when we want to find a service, we want the best, we want the experts. So by appearing on more publication, or when more people mention your name in different area, if you see that name more often, then you will think they are the expert in the field. So people do like to work with the expert, and I think by crafting your releases perfectly, then you could become one of the experts, even though you might be a smaller company in your space.
Absolutely.
So Mickie, I think I have to ask you this question, and I'm sure that a lot of business owner, especially in small business, will think about that. I could write my own article, right? You started your own journey writing an article. So, what is the major benefit doing it DIY versus with working with a professional like yourself?
Well, I feel like eReleases has the benefit of having a major distribution platform, and we certainly are experts at crafting messages. But I do provide a lot of training and support for my customers because I really do believe that the average person can tell your story. And often I feel like you, as an entrepreneur or a small business owner, can often tell your story better than other people. And so I have a free strategy masterclass on how to create newsworthy press releases, doing strategic types of press releases like the survey and study. That's completely free. It's less than an hour. And I challenge anyone to go through that course. You will walk away with at least 10 newsworthy ideas that are applicable to your company. And it's completely free. It's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. And my real benefit at eReleases is to be an educator. And I am able to sort of figure out what's working. And sometimes it's what's working now, and it may not work in a year or two, and sort of share with my customers what's working so that they're doing more dynamic, strategic types of press releases, as opposed to the ones that we normally see that don't generate a lot of attention. And, every time someone does a survey or study and they start getting like a dozen media pickups from a single press release, they're just really shocked that it was that easy. But it wasn't. I mean, they did the survey, they sent it out, they analyzed the data, they put it together in a press release in a format that was interesting and intriguing. There was a lot of work involved, but it wasn't insurmountable. And so I do think that whether you decide to work with us and have us help you with the writing of the release, or whether you do it yourself, I think that as long as you're approaching it strategically, anyone can do it. And I sometimes have people who use us for writing and then move on to do it themselves because they get really comfortable with it and they realize that it's not extremely difficult. The hard part is finding what you should be writing about. There are thousands of things that you could turn into a press release, but really there's probably less than 20 or 30 things that are strategic and would probably get media results. So you really want to flesh those out and build those, and then communicate those to the media. And I think that, I don't know what they are for every person or every company. The survey and study one is the one that works the easiest regardless of your industry. But what you will find is that sometimes there are a lot of different approaches. It might be being the friendly jerk, AKA the contrarian, where something might be very popular in industry and you come in and you're the splash of cold water that says, not so fast, here's the downside of this. And sometimes when everybody in the industry is moving in one direction, you being the one person who thoughtfully and rationally raises your hand and says, not so fast, I think that we should consider these. It allows you to be put into every discussion or article about that, because journalists want to be fair and fair-minded, so they want to cover all sides. But often the articles that get written are one-sided because nobody stepped up and said, I represent the other side of this viewpoint, and here's why. For example, we may not want to consider moving to electric cars as fast as some states and people are wanting us to, because we haven't solved how to dispose of batteries. We're not building batteries out of materials that are environmentally sound. And so maybe we should take a little more time, do a little more research before we embrace electric cars so broadly. And, that no one's going to claim that you're the crazy weird uncle of your industry by saying that, because it was a rational, logical approach. But often by just joining conversations that are already out there and being willing to put your neck out and give it a contrarian viewpoint allows you to sometimes get that kind of pickup.
Thanks for sharing. And I think I wanted to ask you one final question, and it is the $1 million question, right? If you ask the right question or answer the right question, as your case study, show, it does generate, more traffic or income for you. So what should we expect, and how often should we write a press release? And with us, we sometimes we're anxious. We do a Google ad, we do a Facebook sponsor post, for example. We want to be self right away. How often should we do it, and what kind of results should we expect? And is it a long term approach?
Right. So a PR campaign is usually 6 to 8 press releases. So if you're doing one every other month, you could potentially do a small campaign within a year. If you're doing it a little less frequently, like quarterly, it might take you a couple of years to get through a proper PR campaign. That being said, I would really challenge you to not look at what other people are doing with press releases, because you know, like I said, 95, 80% plus of them aren't getting media pickup. And so rather than sort of try to duplicate the messaging that you're seeing out there, try to be more dynamic and strategic. Try to come up with something that is a little bit different. There's something that people talk about called newsjacking that was really popular 10 years ago, and it doesn't work. It's basically joining an industry trend and joining the conversation. And that worked 10 years ago when there was only 3 or 4 people doing press releases on a hot topic. Now, hundreds of people are doing it. So everybody's joining the conversation. If you are going to do approach like that, there is a way to do it that is more layered and nuanced. So rather than joining the same conversation everyone else is doing, break it down to either a specific segment or a particular approach, and so that you're talking about it in a new and fresh way. And I think that with anything that you do, really just peeling back the layers until you get to a truth or an interesting story, you stand the chance of getting media pickup. And it's really interesting. But there's also things that you can do on a regular basis. Right now, there's a lot of people doing top 10 lists and yearly predictions and things like that. It's probably too late by the time you hear this to join that. But think of holidays. So if your industry has a very brisk holiday sales experience, like Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or things like that, you can build top 10 lists of ideas for people to purchase something if you're in the consumer business, and make one of your products one of the ideas. And so a busy journalist who's just looking for a little bit of content might just copy and paste what you wrote, the 10 ideas, and you will be one of those 10 people that just gets rounded up and included in there. You can also tie things into seasonal stuff. Like there's a lot of people in the travel space that have relationships, and they will do something where they talk about, if you're going to go in New England and look at the leaves turning, here are some great places to stay, and make sure that your clients are included, or you yourself are included on that. So you're just making ready-made content that is very useful and timely, so it only lives for a small period of time. So I think that anything you can do to be creative, a little more strategic, putting a little more thought and creativity in it, gives you an edge, so that you're not among the 80-90% of the people that are doing press releases that don't see results. I say, if you do strategic types of press releases, you will have press releases that still don't result in anything. But what you will have is probably out of every 3 or 4 releases that you do, 1 or 2 that does get some media pickup. And sometimes you'll get ones that have a lot of media pickup, and you look at those, and are they something that you could replicate again in a different way or a different approach? But I think that all of these are things that do require creativity and a little bit more work, building out what it is that you're messaging. But it's really cost effective. We had a client early in the pandemic do one press release that would have cost $400, and it generated over 150 articles, over $10 million in sales.
Wow.
and just a $400 press release. Now, it was something that was created just for the pandemic. It was a very short-lived project to help restaurants that were closed down. It was called the Dining Bond Initiative, and it was a way in which you could help your own favorite local restaurant that was likely shut down during the pandemic and get money to them really quickly. And so it it did so well because it was so newsworthy, and it was something that was very positive at a time where there was a lot of negative news. And the media does like to have positive news, especially when there's uncertainty and negativity. So I think that that's why it did so well. But it just shows the opportunity of leverage, because if you had approached the 150 publications and gave each of them a personal pitch, it would have taken too much time, money, and resources. But by just getting it on the newswire, it was put out there and available to a lot of people. And it got picked up in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, a lot of major publications.
Thank you for sharing, Mickey. I think that they're really limitless, right? You just have to put on your thinking hat and don't write press releases like you would write on an ad. If your press releases spark an interest or answer a question or challenge us to think in a certain way, I think that is already a winning, press releases. So for listener who might have individual question who want to reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
So, right. So our website is eReleases.com. We don't employ any salespeople. There's no commissions or sales quotas. We just have editors. They're available by chat, phone, or email. And I think that's a really great way to talk to us. We help a lot of people do their first press release and help them wade through the murkiness that is there and try to figure things out. And I do think that I know a lot of people are cutting back right now with marketing and advertising because of economic uncertainty. And, it can be very cost effective to do several press releases. And the biggest commitment that they would require is time to put that energy into developing a strategic type of press release. And I do think it's worth it. And it's worked for a lot of our clients. During recessions, we've had, some of our best successes among people trying press releases for the first time. And I think it's because when there is economic uncertainty, people like positive news, and they like, stuff that's a little more newsworthy. And if you can be that newsworthy message, you stand a really strong chance of getting the attention that you perhaps deserve.
Thank you so much for coming on to the show today, Mickey. I learned a lot.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.